And you there, father, through it all, yeah. Drumming like Cuban conga beats into your catcher's mitt, hard and fast as cool Papa Bell jumping into bed before the lights went out at the old Negro baseball league.
If I pitch, can you catch? Will you hold the ball? When you step to the plate, will you swing and fall? If you play...
The country was at war, and the country was also divided.
There's a point in 1942 where the Pittsburgh Courier, the African-American paper, they mentioned something they called the Double V campaign. And it was the idea that for African-American citizens, you'd have victory in the war and you'd have victory at home in terms of civil rights. You know, in Europe, you're fighting Adolf Hitler and you're fighting Nazism, but there's not equality at home.
Is a time period when we're seeing people having to fight for their housing, having to not be able to go to school.
It was divided based on race. The Jim Crow laws prevented blacks and whites from socializing together.
They can't go to the theaters. They can't even drink out of a water fountain the same as anybody else. Pools, something as simple as a community pool, was off limits.
The population was continuing to grow. There were numbers of European immigrants and as well as African Americans who were migrating from the South.
The black population in Cleveland ballooned up to almost 30% just within the city itself.
It was growing primarily because Cleveland had jobs, lots of jobs. At one point in the 1940s, there were over 10,000 factories in Cleveland, Ohio.
A lot of the white population fled, and we talk about it as white flight, leaving behind the black community and other minorities to struggle with all the resources, the things that they need, not having access to a lot of resources. And so a lot of black communities forced to try to figure out how to provide a lot of the necessities themselves. And so the constant anxieties, the constant struggles of trying to figure out how to just live every day within the confines that have been created for you by essentially white America. And Cleveland was no different. I think you see one of the examples with Cleveland, if you actually focus it just in on baseball.
Organized baseball, as it was at the time, had black players as far back as 1884. In northern Ohio, there was a guy named Moses Fleetwood Walker who played for the Toledo Blue Stockings until the fateful day when Cap Anson, the Blue Stockings were playing the White Stockings. Perhaps there's some semblance in that whole notion of the teams that were playing. But the manager of the White Stockings refused to take the field because a black player was on the field. And in keeping with where the country was going with the Jim Crow laws, that stopped the integration effort. So in 1947, as many people think that Jackie Robinson was the very first black player in Major League Baseball, organized baseball, not the case.
Cleveland's Negro League history is rich and varied and a little bit sloppy and messy.
Black baseball goes back to at least 1918 with the formation of a team called the Cleveland Tate Stars. That team joined the Negro National League in 1922. There were 9 other teams along with the Tate Stars before the Buckeyes arrived.
There's different theories on why that is, but I think part of it is some of those early teams, the players just weren't very good. And it was difficult when you have a limited amount of disposable income to spend it, coming to watch a game that's, you're gonna watch the home team get clobbered, by 15 runs. It's just not really a way to spend your money.
It's a reflection of the difficulties of finding the resources, finding the places to play, because what happens is all of those Negro League teams basically lasted, for the most part, a year, sometimes way less than so it was a constantly evolving door, essentially, because they didn't have the support, they didn't have the resources they needed.
Only one of them had a winning record, and that was 1931 with the Cleveland Cubs. It's coincidentally, Satchel Paige played on that Cubs team.
Cleveland had more black baseball teams than any other city in the country, Negro League teams. And everybody think, oh, that's a good thing, right? And in actuality, no, it's a reflection of the difficulties of finding the resources, finding the places to play, because what happens is all of those Negro League teams basically lasted, for the most part, a year.
It was a mystery to the league, some of the other owners in the league, because they felt like Cleveland, which at the time was the 6th most populous city in America, which had a large population of people who had moved there from the Great Migration, it just seemed like the perfect place for a Negro League baseball team.
In 1942, Ernest Wright buys the Cleveland Buckeyes in the same year.
He had the good sight to partner with Wilbur Hayes, a local sports promoter, and the two of them built a team. The two of them created stability and consistency in black ball in Cleveland.
The team was called the Buckeyes, and it was expected initially to divide its time between Cleveland and Cincinnati, but it found a more welcoming audience in Cleveland, and they became the Cleveland Buckeyes.
Folks really embraced the Buckeyes because here was a good team. Here was a team that was run well, for the most part, compared to these earlier teams.
So Negro League teams, just in general, had to face everything that any black person had to face in this country, and then it was magnified by the fact that they're traveling. And so just think about all we know about the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and the 40s in particular for the Cleveland Buckeyes.
The travel, the way the teams would spend 2 weeks on the road, living out of a bus, essentially. They did a trip in the summer of '45 to Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. And I can't even fathom what it must have been like to travel by bus as black people through that part of the country at that time in its history. And what they had to endure and put up with and tolerate, and still go out there and perform and play baseball every day and play it very well.
To kind of finance the league, they played a lot of barnstorming games. Like if they were going to go do a game up in Buffalo, they would probably play like 10 games in between, from Cleveland to Buffalo while they were traveling.
They would be on the road all week. They'd be traveling to Akron, to Erie, to Dayton, to Indianapolis, and play local teams or play other Negro League teams in exhibition games. And then they would come home on weekends or on holidays or on certain days where the games would be designated as league games.
So it's not just knowing how to navigate in your own city, but you've got the problem of then understanding how to navigate, a lot of times, very unwritten rules that you might know at home, but suddenly you've moved out of Cleveland and you're traveling across to go to Chicago, but on the way you're playing in Toledo and you're playing in other small towns that have different rules. And so you don't know where you can eat, you don't know where you can get gas, you don't know where you're gonna stay, you don't even know where you're gonna be able to wash your uniforms.
These athletes could ride into a town, fill up the ballpark, but yet not be able to get a meal from the same fans who had just cheered them, or not have a place to stay.
They lived in cars and crappy hotels and stuff like that.
So the Green Books were an opportunity for Black America to help sort of be their support system, but one of the things that was a problem with them is they're written down, right, and they're published. And so publishing takes time, and things change. And so sometimes you would roll into a community with that Green Book thinking something was going to be okay, and it had changed. The restaurant wasn't there anymore, new ownership, et cetera.
And it was just, a very difficult path to take because there was so much travel involved, and it wasn't luxurious for anybody. Even the major leaguers at that point were still traveling by train, but it was even harder for Negro League teams.
We read stories about the players having to, hang their uniforms out the windows of their buses and their cars to dry. And then go to play a game. Or they can't change at a stadium and they have to change outside, they have to change in their cars, and then hopefully not get arrested for being outside and being a black person doing those kinds of things in 1930s, 40s America.
It was such a difficult time, I think, and it's so impossible for us to understand now the challenges that the Buckeyes faced through the war, with segregation, just logistically and competitively. There was a situation where the Buckeyes were just driving in their own cars, and on the night of September 7th, 1942, there was a flat tire out on Route 20 outside of Geneva, and they went over to change the tire, got it fixed, pulled back on the road, and got hit by a truck coming down Route 20. 2 of the Buckeyes were killed, and 3 more were seriously injured. The catcher, Buster Ulysses Brown, the pitcher, Smokey Owens, were killed. 3 more pitchers, Eugene Bremer, one of the stars from 45, was injured along with 2 other pitchers, and they finished the season. They kept playing for the rest of 1942, all on the road. They lost 4 pitchers in that one accident. They lost the rest of the games.
They had played just a ton of barnstorming matches over the last 2 days prior to the accident taking place. So they were essentially driving all night to get to another game. Well, we can't cancel our schedule, so we've just got to get together who we can to make sure we have enough players on the field to get through these last series of games, because it was toward the end of the season. And you think about, what would happen in Major League Baseball today if something that tragic happened. I mean, things would kind of grind to a halt. But for them, it didn't really grind to a halt. They just had to keep going.
And in 43, they stayed in Cleveland for the entire season. During that season, they were voted the most outstanding franchise.
And they were really playing above what you would think for a brand new team.
1945, they played in a World Series.
They played 4 games because the Buckeyes swept. They played in 4 different stadiums. They started here in Cleveland at Municipal Stadium. Then they went to League Park.
On paper, there was no way that the Cleveland Buckeyes should have won.
The Homestead Grays were the equivalent of the New York Yankees at that time. They were winners of 9 straight pennants.
But the Homestead Grays, you have to understand, had been in first place in the Negro National League from 1937 to 1945. They won the previous 2 World Series, because I think it makes the story even more impressive and even more sad that it's been forgotten, because what you've got is one of the most impressive World Series wins. And not only did they win, they won in 4 games. It was supposed to be a 7-game series.
The Buckeyes used 4 different pitchers in these 4 games. Eugene Bremer, the ace, the 2 Jefferson brothers, and then Frank Carswell won the championship in the last one.
They weren't a big team like the Homestead Grays. They were like, they just came out of nowhere to win a championship that year. And they said, well, I'd like to know more about them, because all I'm getting right now are just like empty statistics and not a lot of them.
So many of these players for the 1945 Cleveland Buckeyes were just overlooked, and the story about these players has never been told, and that's the tragedy about it.
Cleveland has had so few winners in baseball that they need to treasure every one there is. Also, it's a very interesting moment in time. This was literally, David beating Goliath. Everybody knew who the Homestead Grays were. They had 5 future Hall of Famers in their lineup, and the Buckeyes not only beat them in the World Series, but swept them. It was astonishing what they did.
And to shut them down, have your pitching, which was good pitching, but not very well nationally known. I mean, that was extraordinarily impressive.
That team produced 2 league champions, 1 World Series champion, and had 6 of the players go on to Major League Baseball.
Sam Jethro played with the Buckeyes from 1942 through 1948 during his greatest years as a baseball player. And he regularly led the Negro American League in all the hitting categories. He was one of the players interviewed by Branch Rickey to possibly break the color barrier. He was actually signed by the Brooklyn Dodgers off the Buckeyes roster in 1948 and went on to have a great career there. But by the time he got to the Boston Braves, it was 1950. He was 33 years old, and yet Ebony magazine still portrayed him as baseball's fastest player.
And he ended up going on to be the oldest Major League Rookie of the Year.
He led the National League in stolen bases, and he had a very good batting average, and unfortunately his best years were behind him.
The one piece that pulled everything together was Quincy Troop, who was the player manager for the team. He was a very talented catcher.
My dad was one of the great catchers of all time. He was much better than Yogi Berra, who's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Yogi Berra told me that he wasn't as good as my father. Roy Campanella's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and he was my father's substitute.
Quincy Troop was signed prior to the 1945 Buckeyes season to be catcher manager. He signed one of the great Hispanic ball players at the time to play with the Buckeyes, a shortstop named Abelino Canizares. But he did a great job managing that team. He was a catcher for the team. He was an excellent hitter. And, his story's not told. And the only thing people know about him is he played a few games for the Indians in 1952. And he did participate in the first African-American battery when the pitcher Sam Toothpick Jones, who also played for the Buckeyes in 1947, pitched with Quincy as his catcher. And that was the first time you had a black pitcher and catcher in the major leagues.
The Buckeyes, you've got an ownership with Wilbur Hayes and Ernie Wright, but it's the community putting its own money into something. And then in 1945, in the sports world, they reach the pinnacle of what you want to accomplish, right? Which is to win the World Series. So you've got something there to be proud of. You've got something in terms of a legacy to pass on to your children.
Wherever you had successful black baseball, you typically had thriving black economies.
Baseball was a form of entertainment. Because people had jobs, baseball was an outlet to spend time and money in their leisure. Not only that, black baseball was an industry. At one point in this country, black baseball was the third largest black business in this country.
They had money, they wanted to go spend it, and they wanted to be seen in public and be part of a community event, and the Buckeyes provided that. So I think it's even bigger than just the Buckeyes teams and the players for the city of Cleveland, especially the African-American community.
You also had spin-off industries. There were hotels, there were restaurants, there were laundries, there were printers. That whole economic system was driven around baseball as an industry in and of itself.
You can't help but appreciate what an integral part of the African-American community the Cleveland Buckeyes must have been during that time.
But you see, businesses, those smaller black-owned businesses, emerged to meet need. Negro Leagues baseball brought, as I define them, those segregated, mandated black-owned businesses, a built-in clientele that led those businesses to their economic heights. If there is a bittersweet aspect to the overall story of the Negro Leagues, it lies in the fact that you can directly parallel the rise and fall of the Negro Leagues with the rise and fall of black economy. And to a great extent, black economy never recovered from losing the Negro Leagues. So what was good morally, what was good socially, was devastating economically.
You think about the other economic aspect of it, the impact that a team is going to have on a community, both bringing in teams to play them when they played at League Park and other stadiums throughout the city, but also the fact that many of the players called Cleveland their home. And so there's an economic impact that, of course, a lot of people don't realize that after baseball integrated, all of that is lost.
It was just one great moment before everything changed, before baseball was integrated, and that really was spelled the end to the Negro Leagues.
To see how high they flew basically in 1945, and then they went back to the World Series in 47, and how quickly that just vanished for them. So they attempted to play in Louisville, Kentucky in 1949, and they thought that that would be a better place than a city that already had an integrated Major League Baseball team. And for the longest time before I did the research, I thought that was basically the end of the Buckeyes. They went to Louisville, that was it. But they actually came back to Cleveland in 1949 toward the end of the season when it was very clear that Louisville was failing. And they made it into 1950, and they weren't even able to finish the season.
And you look at the 1945 Buckeyes and you realize This is a team, this goes back to an era where you didn't have television. If you wanted to see baseball, you had to go see it. And another surprising thing, as I mentioned before, were just how great these players were and how unknown these players were.
They got nothing. I mean, they were just like a flicker in history.
I could go look for the most obscure white ball player who maybe played half a dozen games for a major league team in 1930, and I can probably go to Wikipedia, I can probably find other information about him, his family, where he was born, where he went to school, all the great teams he played for, all the great players he played with, and when he quit baseball, and when he went on to other careers, and when he passed away. That information doesn't exist for the Negro League players. It's hard to locate. And it's unfortunate that people don't know about these players.
What I found in my research is that there is very little information about the Cleveland Buckeyes and the Negro Leagues. So I feel that it's very important that we preserve the information for our future.
These guys were great ball players that were denied a chance to play on the biggest field, and they deserve to be on it, and most of them are forgotten, and they deserve to be remembered. When you think after what happened when it was integrated, you know, all you have to say is like Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Barry Bonds, Ernie Banks, all these guys, the greatest players that ever played. That the idea that they weren't allowed to play in a national spotlight before integration was, I was telling my buddy, I think it was organized crime. I mean, it was just a crime against humanity.
The Cleveland Buckeyes winning the World Championship is akin to Buster Douglas beating Mike Tyson. I mean, this was something that no one thought could ever happen. Here was a team that, again, the 11th team in Cleveland black ball history. Started in 1942, shared a city with Cincinnati, struggled to make a name for themselves. The first team to have staying power in Cleveland, and they go up against the Homestead Grays. And in the games that counted for that World Series, they won every one, and they won convincingly.
The sacrifice, passion, and grit of the Negro League players set the stage for every black player that has played since, like myself. Their stories need to be told and memorialized so they are not forgotten.